peoples of this land, then you are considered as a settler. You are considered as somebody who immigrated to this land. Yesterday was known also as Orange Shirt Day. And this Orange Shirt Day is significant because it tells the story of injustice that took place to the children that went through the residential schools, the Indian residential schools here in this country. Because the story behind that orange shirt was that there was a woman, a girl, a 6-year-old girl, that she was going to attend school for the first time. And little did she know what that school was going to be. But it happened to be one of those Indian residential schools. Her name was Phyllis Worstead. And so, as a 6-year-old girl, her grandmother, although they were poor, they didn't have a lot of wealth, but they were able to muster up enough money to buy her a new, bright, shiny, orange shirt. And so she wore this shirt to go to school. But when she went to the school, the first thing that she experienced at the school was that they stripped her of these clothes. They removed these clothes from her. Because the whole point of the residential schools was to remove the identity of the indigenous people. They were viewed as savages. They were viewed as people that were lesser than others who came to settle in this land, and therefore they needed to be cultured. But they needed to be cultured based on the definition of the colonialist settlers, not based on their own culture, which they experienced as a genocide. It was a cultural genocide. And yes, we use that term because it's something that is very strong, but it indicates accurately what they experienced, because the whole point of these residential schools was to remove their culture, their language, their identity, anything that was attached to their indigenous background. That it was meant to be removed and replaced with something else. That was the injustice that they suffered. And to this day, not all of the graves of these children who attended these residential schools have been discovered. There are a number of unmarked graves that are associated or affiliated with these residential schools, where children, they died, they were buried, and nobody knew anything about any of them. And so as these graves then, they became discovered recently, in our time, it speaks to that injustice that they experienced. And so for this 6-year-old girl, who for the first time, she was happy to go to school, but little did she know what she was about to experience in her bright, new, shiny orange shirt, which she never saw after that first day again. It was taken and removed. And so it's a day to understand the injustices that took place to the people, the original indigenous peoples of this land, the First Nation, the Inuit, the Métis. Several years ago, there was a report that was issued by the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, or Commission of Canada, regarding the First Nations people. And the findings of this report are very disturbing, because it highlights the injustices that happened to the indigenous people of this land over the past 130 years and then some. Some of which injustices continue to this day. Some of these injustices continue to this day. So the question is, what can we do as a community? What is our responsibility as Muslims? What is it that we need to do? One of the recommendations of the report is for faith groups, institutions, and social justice groups to adopt and implement the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And so we need to know what has happened to them. We don't know the full extent of what has taken place, but we need to educate ourselves. We feel the brunt of racism and discrimination and Islamophobia. We feel the brunt of that. And it's easy for us to go through those experiences and we want to speak about them because it's not right. It's an injustice that's happening against us. But again, we need to be consistent in how we implement the principles of our faith. That it is not only about us, but it is about anyone who have injustices that occur against them. So we need to educate ourselves on the plights of the Aboriginal and original peoples of this land, of the indigenous. And we need to recognize those acts of injustice as acts of injustice. We need to understand that when this Truth and Reconciliation report first came out, there was a statement that was issued by the Winnipeg Muslim community. And this helps to set an example for us. This statement, it said, our community painfully acknowledges the cultural genocide inflicted on First Nations and families and communities in Canada. And we offer our deepest apology to First Nations brothers and sisters. We fully agree with the TRC statement, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission statement, that we all inherit both the benefits and the obligations of Canada. We are all treaty people who share responsibility for taking action on reconciliation. What exactly is reconciliation? It's the understanding not only of the injustices that happen to the people of this land, but to take active steps to redress those grievances. Because healing cannot start until we deal with the injustices and acknowledge them and recognize them for what they are. Only at that point can people begin the healing process. So we need to focus on the obligation of Muslims to stand up for truth and justice. This is who we are. That is an obligation. And to raise awareness of the issues that are impacting the indigenous community and pledge our support for anyone being wrong. But we can also see practical ways in which we can engage in this pursuit. There are communities that are still on water boil alerts, meaning that they don't have clean water and they have to boil their water before they use it. That's here in Canada. That you think that this is, like something that you find only in a third world country. But there are people living in Canada in third world conditions, even though Canada is a first world country. So how is it that you have these communities that don't even have clean water? The mental health issues that many of the youth of indigenous populations go through and suffer. The murdered and missing indigenous women and girls whose plight is unknown because these things happen and nobody speaks about it. Nobody cares. These are the injustices that they continue to experience. Although we're a minority as Muslims, we're still part of the Canadian majority that benefits from stolen land and broken treaties. Understand that. We acknowledge the land that we live on. This is land that is the traditional territory of the First Nations, of the Arawandara, of the Islamic, of the Haudenosaunee, and the Lupapi, the Lunapiwik tribes, the people who have a long-standing relationship to this land, to the water, and to the region of southwestern Ontario. These are sacred traditional lands of the original people. The local First Nation communities of this area include the Chippewas of the nation, of the Thames First Nation, the Oneida Nation of the Thames, the Munsee Delaware Nation. These are all from the Aboriginal indigenous peoples of this land whose history goes back not hundreds of years, thousands of years. And yet we continue to benefit from these lands. We need to understand, for Muslims, it is not permissible, it's haram for Muslims to benefit from stolen property. Now the point is not that we just basically pick up and leave. No, of course not. This is the situation that we find ourselves in. We know that Imam al-Nawawi, rahimahullah, he refused to eat of any of the fruit Damascus, because he knew that many of the orchards of the areas of Damascus and the surrounding areas, many of them were awqaf. They were endowments for orphans and others, and he felt that they weren't being handled properly, so he feared, Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah, that he would be eating fruit that was not from a permissible source. And some scholars say that's one of the reasons why he died so young, at the age of 44. But this is to show the degree and the extent to which Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah was concerned in terms of matters related to justice. It is obligatory as Muslims that we fulfill our treaties, our covenants, our agreements. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu awfu bil uqud. O you who believe, fulfill your covenants. This is what Allah tells us. Fulfill your contracts, whatever they are, promises or covenants or oaths or treatises, whatever they may be, fulfill them. And Allah tells us, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِأَمَانَاتِهِمْ وَعَهْدِهِمْ رَاعُونَ. He describes as one of the characteristics of the believers, those who are to their trusts and promises, they are attentive. So that's what we're talking about here, is being attentive to these matters and these affairs. And so we have to deal with the circumstances that we find ourselves in. We can take up social justice causes on a humanitarian basis. That is a concrete action that we can do. Our hearts, they still bleed, continue to bleed from the injustices that happen to our brethren elsewhere. Whether it be the Palestinians under occupation, whether it be to our brothers and sisters in Kashmir, the people of Syria, the people of Iraq, the Rohingya, the Uyghurs in China, in Bangladesh, those who are in many different places. The list goes on, and there are many in terms of historically that they had atrocities and injustices that took place against them because of their identity. There were literally millions of indigenous people whose lives were lost when the colonial settlers came to these lands. And so most of our Muslim countries have also been impacted by colonialism, which we still feel the impacts to this day, but most of the time it's been forgotten. So this is for us, we need to understand our reality today. We're living here in Canada. We should take steps to ensure that we recognize the injustices of the past happening in our own backyard, and this is a means to prevent injustices to continue to occur or from occurring in the future, whether it's against Muslims or otherwise. Because this is what Islam stands for, and we need to understand this. We show solidarity with any and all people who have been wronged, and we do so for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because this is what His deen teaches us. We should take action on a principled basis to help rectify the wrongs of the past to the best of our ability, to the best of our capacity. However, at the same time, and I need this to be very clear, the point, we should not use the suffering of other people to highlight injustices that are happening to our own. Because that is being opportunistic, and that is flawed, and there are pitfalls in that, and that's not the way of our deen. We are not opportunistic people. We do not say that we're going to help or stand with the indigenous because to highlight our own injustices that have been occurring to us and to our own people. No, we don't do that. But rather, we take a principled stance. Any injustice against any people that we treat it as equally wrong. This is something that we need to understand. This is not a marginal issue for us as Muslims. We live in these lands. And in terms of what it is, that it's not something marginal. It strikes at the core of who we are and our identity and what we stand for. And so this is how we can actively contribute to the society that we live in. We stand with the oppressed on these issues to know that they will stand with us and are committed wherever they may come, wherever these things happen. We know what happened in the outpouring of support when the Abdul's family, Allah yarhamhum, when they were killed. You saw the outpouring of support from all groups of people that came towards us. And that is something that we need to also show and express when we hear of their children, of their women, of their girls being lost or murdered or have injustices committed against them. And so as Muslim Canadians, we can help this country move towards reconciliation with the First Nation. These are practical steps that we can take. We are all treaty people, and we share responsibility for the action, taking action on reconciliation, which has relevance for our community today in in light of some of the struggles that both our communities face, especially in terms of building respectful relationships with indigenous people, with the First Nations, the Inuit, and the Native. Remember the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. This is a hadith narrated in the collection of Imam Ahmad, as well as by Ibn Hibban. And he said, or this is narrated from Anas ibn Malik رضي الله عنه قال: ما خطبنا نبي الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إلا قال: لا إيمان لمن لا أمانة ولا دين لمن لا عهد. Listen to these words of our Prophet ﷺ. He did not deliver a khutbah. ما خطبنا نبي الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. This is what Anas is saying, that the Prophet ﷺ did not give a khutbah except that he said, لا إيمان لمن لا أمانة له. That one who has no amana, no trust, their faith is incomplete. They don't have faith. Their faith is incomplete. لا إيمان. This is a nothing in terms of the completeness. It's a negation of presence of faith, of complete faith. For the one who doesn't have amana, the one who does not have trust. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, وَلَا دِينَ لِمَنْ لَا عَهْدَ. And that one who has no covenant in terms of fulfillment, they have no deen. Their deen is incomplete if they are not fulfilling their covenants, if they are not fulfilling their promises. لَا دِينَ لِمَنْ لَا عَهْدَ. And so this is very powerful. If we as Muslims want to be successful in Canada, then we should not just fight only for our cause, but rather we should strive and fight for justice for all people who are oppressed. And we must teach our children this. There are messages that we can impart to our children to talk about some of the challenges and the difficulties and the hardships that the people of this nation went through. This is part of education and awareness. And so we also need to teach our children about the dangers and pitfalls of holding views or expressing statements that can be deemed as discriminatory or bigoted or racist. When our children are attending public schools and engage with other students or teachers or staff coming from diverse communities, then they must be conscious and cautious not to act in ways that would be seen as demeaning others, as putting down other people's culture or their beliefs or their ethnicities or their origins or whatever it may be. Just as we and our children are hurt by others who speak ill of us, or speak in a derogatory manner about our faith or about our culture and our customs. This is Islamophobia. That impacts us. It hurts us. We must accord to others the same feeling when people say such things against them regarding their cultures and their beliefs. But we shouldn't stop there. We should be active in creating environments, whether at our schools, at our workplaces, and in the general public, that are free from discrimination. Do our part. This is something that we can do. And so, for members of the indigenous community, we can start by learning about their struggles, many of which we can relate to directly, but everyone's experience at the same time is unique. No two people will go through the same experiences. And so, we take on the benefits of living in this country, but also the duties and obligations of being Canadian. And one of the statements from the Truth and Reconciliation Report is that we all inherit both the benefits and the obligations of Canada. And one of our obligations is reconciliation. So we need to seriously think, what is it that we're doing in this regard? And especially in light of the continued impacts of colonialism on the indigenous peoples of Canada. Today is October the 1st, which is officially Islamic History Month in all of Canada as well as in Ontario. And this year, the theme of Islamic History Month is anti-indigenous racism and Islamophobia, coming together for a month of Him. That's this year's theme, because we have common experiences, and so we need to stand together and acknowledge one another's struggles in order for us to begin that process of healing together, so we can come together and heal. And in 2017, the theme was celebrating diversity, honoring reconciliation. So this is about acknowledging the struggles of our communities here. It's about acknowledging that the injustice is done in order for reconciliation to take place. These are some of the things that we can do الحمد لله رب العالمين، وافضل الصلاه والسلام على سيد الانبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى اله وصحبه وسلم. يا ايها الذين امنوا اتقوا الله قولا سديدا يصلح لكم اعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. ان الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا ايها الذين امنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى ال محمد كما صليت على ابراهيم وعلى ال ابراهيم وبارك على محمد وعلى ال محمد كما باركت على ابراهيم وعلى ال ابراهيم في العالمين انك حميد مجيد. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات المسلمين والمسلمات الاحياء منهم والاموات انك يا ربنا سميع قريب مجيب الدعوات. ربنا ظلمنا انفسنا وان لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. اللهم ارحم موتانا وموتى المسلمين. اللهم اشف مرضانا ومرضى المسلمين. اللهم انصر اخواننا المستضعفين المظلومين في مشارق الارض وفي مغاربها. اللهم ارفع الظلم، اللهم ارفع البأس، اللهم ارفع الظلم والبأس والاجرام برحمتك يا ارحم الراحمين عن المسلمين وعن جميع الناس انك يا ربنا سميع قريب مجيب الدعوات. ربنا اتنا في الدنيا حسنه وفي الاخره حسنه وقنا عذاب النار. واخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. الله اكبر الله اكبر الله